The scanner beeped once, then went quiet. Reed Calloway looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked back at the empty space outside his window. Stars, dust, nothing else. He was 14 days into a solo cargo run across the Cauldron Corridor, hauling machine parts in the belly of his old freighter, the Harrow. The run was boring. That was fine. Reed liked boring. He checked the scanner again. There it was, a faint cluster of life signs, barely above background noise, sitting in the debris field off his port side. The coordinates belonged to nothing on any map. No station, no vessel, no colony marker, just old wreckage from some forgotten conflict, drifting the way things drift when nobody bothers to collect them. Reed sat back in his pilot chair and crossed his arms. His delivery window was already tight. If he diverted now, he would miss it. The penalty clause in his contract was not small. The client was not the forgiving type. He sat there for 2 full minutes, doing the math. Then he turned the Harrow toward the debris field. He found the pod wedged between 2 crushed hull plates from a warship that had clearly lost a fight years ago. The pod itself was not military surplus. It was new, expensive, and badly cracked along one side. Atmosphere was bleeding from the break in a long, slow ribbon of frozen vapor. Reed suited up without thinking much about it and took the Harrow's small boarding arm out to it manually. Through the cracked face of the pod, he saw them. 7 small shapes coiled together in the cold. Dragon hatchlings, he could tell by the scale pattern, the small tucked wings, the way their tails wrapped automatically around each other even while unconscious. None of them was longer than his forearm. The pod had been a breeding chamber, sealed and pressurized. Whatever cracked it open had done so recently. The temperature inside was already near fatal. 6 of them were still, 1 was not. The smallest one, coal dark scales, eyes too large for its face, had pressed itself against the cracked wall and was staring directly at Reed through the break. It did not flinch. It did not retreat. It just looked at him with those enormous amber eyes as if it had been waiting specifically for him to show up. Reed cut the pod open with his torch and pulled them out one by one, working fast in the suit's clumsy gloves. He carried them into the Harrow's cargo hold in 2 trips, then stripped off his suit and stood in the middle of the hold looking at 7 unconscious dragon children laid out on the floor plates. He did not know what to do. So he did what he always did when he did not know what to do. He started working. He piped warm air from the engine manifold into the hold through a rigged bypass. He pulled every spare blanket from his bunk locker and built a shallow nest out of cargo netting and padding. He rehydrated protein paste with hot water and used a medical syringe, the smallest one in the kit, to get a few drops into each unconscious hatchling. The cold dark one, the small one who had been awake, watched every move he made. When Reed finally crouched down in front of it, it lifted its tiny head and pushed its snout against the back of his bare hand. A small curl of smoke rose from its nostrils, barely anything, just enough to mean something. Reed stayed in that position for a while. He thought about the report he was supposed to file any time he made an unscheduled diversion. He thought about the penalty clause. He thought about what dragon hatchlings meant in terms of galactic law, cross-species custody, and the half-dozen agencies that would have very strong opinions about this situation. He filed no report. He was not sure why, he just did not. He made himself a cup of tea, settled into the cargo hold doorway, and looked at 7 sleeping dragon bobbies in the orange warmth of his rigged heating setup. "Well," he said to the empty ship, "all right then." The Harrow continued on its course, now very late, toward a delivery that would arrive well past its window. Reed drank his tea and did not think too hard about what came next. There was time for that later. Right now, the smallest one had fallen asleep with its nose resting on his boot, and Reed found he did not want to move. He named them in the order they woke up. The cold dark one had been awake from the start, so she came first, Soot. The next to open her eyes was reddish and restless, so he called her Cinder. Then came Flint, who bit Reed's finger the moment he was conscious enough to do it. Then Brace, Tallow, Wren, and Dusk, each waking in their own time over the next 2 days, each immediately suspicious of Reed, and each slowly persuaded by the combination of warmth, food, and the fact that Soot did not seem afraid of him at all. Reed talked to them constantly while he worked. He explained what he was doing. He told them when he was going to touch them. He apologized when a rehydrated protein paste mix did not smell right and they refused it. He spent 3 hours reading pre-war xenobiology files on his tablet, crouched in the cargo hold, while 6 hatchlings slept and Soot sat on his knee watching the screen like she was trying to read along. He delivered the cargo 11 days late. The penalty clause cost him badly. He paid it and went back to work. Over the following weeks, the 7 hatchlings learned the Harrow sounds better than Reed knew them himself. They knew which pipe knock meant the engine was running warm. They knew the exact pitch of the scanner's idle hum. They knew Reed's footsteps before he reached any given corridor, and they would arrange themselves, consciously or not, so that whoever was closest to his path would be the one to greet him first. Soot was always closest. She grew fastest too and quietest. While Flint and Cinder roughhoused in the cargo hold and Brace attempted to eat the comms cable twice, Soot watched. She watched Reed repair things. She watched him eat. She watched him sit in the dark pilot seat some nights when he couldn't sleep, staring out at the stars without saying anything. On those nights she would climb up beside him and press her small, warm side against his arm, and he would not tell her to go back to her nest. The trouble came at Caro Outpost 6 weeks in. Reed had rented a small dry dock bay to do engine maintenance and restock. He was carrying 7 Dragon hatchlings in a cargo hold with no documentation, no permits, and no plausible explanation that would not end in a customs hold and a very long investigation. He had developed a system: keep them quiet, keep the hold sealed, work fast. The system lasted exactly until a 4-armed Shivari smuggler named Dahlia walked past the hold door at the wrong moment and heard Flint attempting to roar, which at this age sounded less like a roar and more like an aggressive sneeze that produced a small flame. Dahlia did not scream. She leaned in the doorway, looked at Reed, looked at the 7 Dragon hatchlings and said very calmly, "How much?" "They're not for sale," Reed said. Dahlia studied him for a moment. "Then you have a problem," she said, "and I am the only solution within 6-star systems who will not immediately report you." She named a number. It was not a small number. "Monthly," she added, "for as long as I look the other way." Reed paid it. He did not like it. He paid it anyway. Then Cinder got sick. It came on fast, a stillness in her that was wrong, a heat in her scales that was too much even for a fire-type hatchling. Reed sat with her for 61 hours straight. He used everything in the medical kit. He used things that were not in the medical kit but seemed logically similar. He changed her temperature environment 4 times, trying to find what her body needed. He talked to her the whole time, not because he thought it helped medically, but because he could not stand the silence. On the 3rd day, Cinder lifted her head and ate something. Reed put his face in his hands and breathed. After that, all 7 hatchlings followed him everywhere. Not in a chaotic way, in a deliberate way, as if a decision had been made collectively that wherever Reed went was the right place to be. He would turn around in a corridor and find them lined up behind him. He would sit down to eat and find them arranged in a loose ring around his chair. He stopped trying to send them back to the hold. 3 months after the debris field, Soot climbed to his shoulder, put her snout beside his ear and said her first word. Not in draconic, in standard human, clear as anything. "Stay," she said. Reed went very still. Then he laughed until his eyes watered, and Soot made a sound he had never heard from her before, low and rumbling, like something between a purr and a growl, and he realized slowly that she was laughing too. The boarding clamps hit the Harrow with a sound like the ship's spine breaking. Reed had been eating lunch. The tray hit the floor. He was in the pilot seat in 4 seconds, and what he saw on the exterior camera made him sit down very slowly and place both hands flat on the console. The vessel latched onto the Harrow's hull was not the size of a vessel. It was the size of a bad idea. Long and dark and scaled in the way that only one civilization in the galaxy built their ships, not plated, not bolted, grown. Dragon Empire Military. The class markings put it somewhere between a patrol enforcer and a war courier, which meant the person in charge of it had both speed and authority and probably was not interested in anyone's explanations right now. A signal came through on the Harrow's comms. Broadband. No encryption. The kind of signal you send when you want everyone nearby to know exactly what is happening. Human vessel. This is Imperial War Caller Drath of the Dragon Empire's 5th Enforcement Wing. You are in possession of 7 heirs of House Vareth, noble line of the Empire. Surrender them immediately and without resistance. You have 60 seconds to respond. Reed sat there. 52 of those 60 seconds passed before he opened the comms channel. "This is Reed Calloway," he said. "Cargo runner. Independent. I found them in a dead pod in the outer belt debris field about 2 years back. I'd like to explain before anyone does anything irreversible." There was a pause. Then, "Open your docking port. You will be boarded." Reed opened the docking port. He stood in the cargo hold with his hands visible and waited. 6 armored Imperial soldiers came through first. Then Warcaller Drath, tall, broad, wearing armor that looked like it had not been scratched in 20 years of service, which said more about his opponents than about the armor. He looked at Reed. He looked at the cargo hold. He looked at the 7 dragon hatchlings, now 2 years old, roughly the size of large dogs, capable of short bursts of flight and basic fire breath, who were arranged in a loose line between Reed and the soldiers. Wings spread still, watching. Drath said something in Draconic. It was a command. Reed did not speak Draconic, but the tone was clear. "Stand aside. Come here, come now." None of the 7 moved. Soot, who was now tall enough that her head came level with Reed's shoulder, turned to look at him once. Then she looked back at Drath and made a sound that was not quite a growl and not quite a warning, but sat somewhere between both. One of the soldiers stepped forward and reached for Cinder's wing. Cinder did not move away. She bit the soldier's armored gauntlet hard enough to leave a visible dent in the reinforced plating. The soldier stopped. Drath held up one hand and the soldier stepped back. Silence in the hold. Drath looked at Reed with an expression that suggested this was not how his day was supposed to go. "They are heirs of a great house," he said, in accented but clear standard. "They cannot be forcibly removed without risk of harm to their persons. Politically, that is not something I am authorized to do." "Right," Reed said. "You, however, are not protected by any such complication." "I figured," Reed said. "Do you want the logs? I have everything, every medical record, every supply purchase. The 61 hours I sat with Cinder when she was sick. The xenobiology reading I did in a cargo hold at 3 in the morning because I didn't know what else to do. I kept records of all of it." Drath studied him. His expression did not change much, but something behind his eyes shifted, a recalculation of some kind. "Why did you keep records?" Reed thought about it honestly. "In case I got something wrong," he said. "I wanted to be able to look back and fix it." Another silence. "You will be placed under Imperial detainment," Drath said at last. "You and your ship will be transported to Dreven, capital world of the Empire, to face proceedings before the matriarchs. The heirs will accompany you under the same order, as they appear unable, or unwilling, to be separated from your person at this time." "All right," Reed said. Drath looked at him like he was trying to find the angle. "You are not afraid." Reed looked at the 7 dragons behind him. Soot had her wing tip resting against his back, the way she always stood when she thought he might need steadying. "I've been more scared," he said. "Cinder's bad night was worse than this." Drath said nothing. He turned and walked back toward the docking port, and his soldiers fell in behind him. Reed stood in his cargo hold, under guard, heading to the seat of an empire that had never held a trial for a human before. Soot stayed pressed against his side the whole way. Vareth Hall had ceilings high enough for a full-grown dragon to fly inside without touching stone. Reed stood at the center of it with his hands at his sides and tried not to look like he was calculating how many exits there were. There were 3. He had counted them on the way in. The 5 matriarchs sat at the far end of the hall on a raised platform of black stone. They were old, ancient in the way only dragons got, when their scales had gone from whatever color they had started as to something closer to iron and charcoal and deep water. The eldest, the one in the center seat, was called Saravith. Reed knew her name because Soot had told him on the transport, speaking quietly in his ear. Saravith had ruled longest. Saravith's word ended arguments. Imperial Advocate Sir Ren read the charges. His voice was formal and very loud and took a long time to get through all of them. Theft of imperial persons, unlawful cross-species bonding, cultural contamination of noble lineage. The last one Reed did not fully understand, but the first 2 were clear enough. When Sir Ren finished, Saravith looked at Reed. "Speak," she said. Reed spoke. He did not use formal language. He did not have any. He told the story the same way he would have told it to anyone: found a dead pod, found 7 dying hatchlings, took them aboard, did his best. He said he knew what they were worth once he figured out their bloodline markers, which took him about 3 weeks. He said he had not sold them. When Saravith asked him why not, Reed was quiet for a moment. "I don't have a good answer for that," he said. "I just couldn't." Saravith looked at him for a long time. She did not write anything down. She did not consult with the other matriarchs. She simply looked at him with eyes that had watched 10,000 years of history and appeared to be measuring him against some standard he was not aware of. Then the hatchlings were called forward for the lineage rituals. The rituals were ancient. Reed had read about them barely in the imperial histories he had recited as bedtime stories for the past 2 years because he had run out of other things to read aloud, and they seemed like something the hatchlings should know. Each ritual was a question about House Vareth, its symbols, its history, its laws, its oaths. All 7 answered every question correctly. A low sound moved through the hall, not speech, just something like collective breath held and then released. Even Sir Ren had gone quiet. Then the final question, the one that closed every lineage ritual, spoken to establish the foundation of a young dragon's loyalty structure. "Who do you call your first guardian?" The matriarchs were looking at the hatchlings. The hatchlings were looking at Reed. Soot answered first in standard human, her voice clear and unhurried. "Reed." Then Cinder, then Flint, then all of them, one after another, not in Draconic, not in any imperial tongue, in the language of the one species in the known galaxy that the Dragon Empire had never formally allied with, never trusted, and never understood. 7 times the same name. The hall was silent for a very long time. Saravith spoke one word to the other matriarchs in Draconic. They did not debate it. They simply nodded, one by one. A recess was called. The soldiers led Reed to a side chamber, smaller, quieter, furnished with a chair, and a window that looked out at the capital city spread across the valley below. He sat down. All 7 hatchlings arranged themselves around him in the now familiar formation, Soot at his shoulder, Flint at his feet, the others in a loose ring as if the circle itself was a statement. Drath stood at the chamber door. He had been standing guard since Dreven. He had not said much. "You should have been afraid of them," he said at last, looking at Reed and the 7 dragons. "I was," Reed said, "at the start." Drath was quiet a moment. What changed? Reed looked down at Flint, who had wrapped his tail around Reed's ankle and gone to sleep on his boot. "They fell asleep on my boots," he said. "It's hard to stay afraid of something that falls asleep on your boots." Drath looked at this for a while. His face did not change much. But he stopped leaning against the door frame and stood up straight, which in Reed's experience was what soldiers did when something had adjusted their internal calculations without their permission. Outside, the matriarchs deliberated. The sun moved across the sky above Dreven. The hatchlings slept. Reed waited and was not afraid and did not know what was coming, and found that he was all right with that. It was Cinder who broke it open. The lineage verification ritual had one final stage that the Advocate had not yet reached, the memory test. Dragon hatchlings carried their first visual impressions permanently, burned into memory the way a brand marks metal. What a hatchling saw in its first moments outside the egg was permanent, immovable, true in a way that no testimony and no document could be. So Ren called Cinder forward. He asked her to surface her first memory, a standard ritual request, used to confirm hatching conditions and bloodline continuity. Cinder closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the projection came from a gland behind her left eye that all dragons of her line carried, a visible image cast in the air in front of her, wavering slightly, like something seen through old glass. It was not the inside of a breeding pod. It was a face. A dragon, adult, wearing the sigil crest of House Callow on his chest plating, standing over the pod controls, his hand on a switch, his expression calm and deliberate in the way that people look when they have made a decision they have thought about for a long time. Cinder had seen him through the shell, in those first seconds after cracking, before the cold hit. She had remembered him ever since. The hall did not go silent this time. It went loud, a sound Reed had never heard before, a kind of collective noise that was part anger and part something older and harder to name. Drath moved before anyone else did, crossing the floor in long, fast strides toward the Callow representative seated in the witness gallery, who was already rising from his chair. Things moved quickly after that, and then they moved very slowly, and then they stopped entirely. The freeze was declared within the hour. Reed learned what the freeze was from Soot, who had heard it discussed in low tones between the guards and translated it for him in short, plain sentences while they walked him back to the holding chambers. The freeze was the Dragon Empire's most extreme political state. It had been declared 3 times in recorded history. All imperial proceedings halted. All diplomatic contact with outside powers ended. No vessel left Dragon space. No vessel entered. The borders simply closed, the way a wound closes, and the Empire turned inward to deal with whatever had gone wrong inside it. What had gone wrong was House Callow. The investigation that followed moved fast once the memory evidence was confirmed. 3 of the 5 matriarch seats had been held by Callow marriage ties. The sabotage of the Vareth breeding pod had not been a random act. It had been the opening move in a plan to collapse House Vareth's line and absorb its holdings and its bloodline rights. The plan had worked for 2 years, right up until Reed Calloway had not filed a report. Outside Dragon space, no one knew any of this. All they knew was that the Empire had gone dark. Galactic Assembly monitoring stations reported total communications blackout across the border. Fleet commanders requested permission to mobilize. Trade lanes shut down. Smaller civilizations that depended on Dragon space shipping corridors went into emergency rationing. The Galactic Assembly held an emergency session. Nobody could agree on what was happening or what to do about it. Inside Vareth Hall, Reed had a different problem. He was the only non-dragon in a building full of noble houses choosing sides, and every faction that came to him did so for the same reason. The 7 heirs trusted him, and right now the 7 heirs were the most important living beings in the Empire's political structure. Whatever Reed carried between houses, whatever he said or repeated or confirmed, no faction could claim he was aligned with their rivals. He was human. He had no side. He had no house. He had no stake in any outcome except getting back to a cargo run. He was now approximately 13 months behind on. So he carried messages. He confirmed facts. He repeated things accurately and refused to add to them or take from them. Soot translated everything. She had grown taller than Reed by now, her dark scales carrying a faint iridescence in direct light. She had also developed the habit of standing slightly in front of him whenever someone new entered the room, not blocking him, just present, in the way that said this one is mine without needing words for it. At night the seven of them settled around Reed in the holding suite. Tallow kept his tail against Reed's back. Wren slept across the doorway like a lock. Dusk, the quietest of them all, put her head in Reed's lap and stayed there, breathing slow. The freeze held for 19 days. On the 20th day, Serevith emerged from the deliberation chamber. The three remaining unconflicted matriarchs walked behind her. Her face gave nothing away. But she looked at Reed before she looked at anyone else. And she gave him a very small nod. Serevith spoke for a long time. Reed stood in the center of Vareth Hall and listened, with Soot beside him translating in a low voice directly into his ear. The ruling covered many things first: House Callow's dissolution, the stripping of its titles, the confirmation of its members' crimes. 3 individuals were named specifically. Their sentences were read aloud. Reed had been in the Empire long enough to understand that dragon justice was not human justice, and he did not flinch, because he had seen what those 3 had done to 7 children in an egg, and he found he had no argument left in him on the subject. House Vareth was formally reinstated. The 7 heirs were confirmed. Their bloodline was restored to full standing in the imperial record, the last line of their house, and now the ruling made clear, a line that would continue. Then Serevith paused. She looked at Reed. "There is no precedent," she said, in standard, the first time she had used it in open court, "for what this human did. We have searched our records. There is no law for it. There is no title for it. There is no category in which it fits." She paused again. "So we made one." The ruling was read by Seren, whose voice had lost some of its formal certainty over the past 3 weeks. Reed Calloway, human independent cargo runner, was to be granted the title of Clutch Father of House Vareth. Not honorary, not symbolic, legal, permanent. For the full natural lifespan of the 7 heirs, he was recognized as kin. He could not be separated from them by any imperial law. He carried no political power, no claim to house assets, no vote in house decisions. What he carried was simpler and, in the Empire's ancient system, rarer. His name was entered into the house bloodline record. The first human name in 10,000 years of Dragon Empire history. The hall was completely still, not the silence of shock, the silence of something settling, the way old stone settles when it finds the right place to rest. Outside Dragon space, the freeze lifted at the same moment the ruling broadcast went out. Every empire, alliance, and minor civilization in known space received it simultaneously on the diplomatic channels. The Galactic Assembly's emergency session was still in progress. The broadcast interrupted it. There were accounts later of the chamber going quiet mid-speech, one delegate after another stopping as the translation reached them. Mobilized fleets stood down in confusion. Diplomatic channels flooded overnight with requests for clarification. 3 major shipping networks immediately filed applications to reopen the Dragon Corridor lanes. A university on the Assembly's core world sent a research request to the Empire asking to study human bonding behaviors, which the Empire declined politely, and which Drath, in his private report to the matriarchs, had already proposed for internal study under the heading of military intelligence. A categorization that fooled nobody, but which allowed him to write the report without admitting it was personal curiosity. Inside Vareth Hall, Reed was asked if he had any response to the ruling. He said he did. "Is the Harrow still in the docking cradle?" he asked. "I have a cargo delivery that's about 13 months late and I'd like to finish it." A sound moved through the hall that Reed had not heard before from Dragon nobles. It took him a moment to identify it, because it was not quite the same as the human version. but it was laughter. Soot lowered her head until her eye was level with his face. She had grown to nearly twice his height, but she still did this, came down to him when she needed to say something she wanted him to hear clearly. "We are coming with you," she said. Reed stared at her. "All 7 of you." "You stayed," she said, as if that explained everything. As if that was the whole of it, the entire accounting, the only math that had ever mattered. Reed stood there in the largest hall he had ever been in, with 7 dragons looking at him and an empire watching, and he thought about the Harrow, small and battered and barely big enough for one man going nowhere in particular. "I'm going to need a bigger ship," he said. He got one. He never asked for it. It simply appeared in the Dreven docking registry the next morning, registered in his name, 3 times the size of the Harrow, fitted with 7 dragon-scale sleeping cradles and 1 very ordinary human bunk. The House Vareth Treasury did not send an invoice. The new ship did not have a name yet. Reed was taking suggestions. Soot had already voted. She wanted to call it Stay. Reed said he would think about it. He did not think about it for very long. When the vessel pulled away from Dreven into open space, course set for the Cauldron Corridor and a delivery 13 months overdue, 7 dragons were arranged around the pilot's seat, some sleeping, some watching the stars, one with her tail wrapped loosely around the back of Reed's chair. The universe outside was the same universe it had always been. The people inside the ship were not the same people they were.